Grant, thank you. Grant Dick, the Central Southland College principal. An emailer says, at my son's intermediate, on a freezing 5-degree day in a biting Wellington southerly, they locked all the kids out of the classrooms at lunchtime. My son wore his puffer jacket but was ordered to take it off because it was green. The school rules are only for black coats. The uniform was green, but the rule was only black puffer jackets, says Kate. Does that sound sensible to you?
I couldn't quite follow that, sorry. The uniform was...
He had to take his puffer jacket off because it was the wrong colour.
Well, I just think that's getting a bit silly if it's a freezing cold day as described.
Yeah. Okay.
Like, do you want your kids sick? Or do you want them, warm and... Especially, why would you lock them out on a freezing cold day like that?
Well, this is a longer email, but anyway, Kate asks the school...
Again, where were the staff? They were in the staff room, presumably.
With puffer jackets on.
With a heater on, presumably.
Kate asks the school, and the reply is, tough luck, wear a merino top underneath, not the puffer jacket on top, says Kate. All right. We may as well talk about schools pretty much up until the end. Kiwi blog is complaining that the Birkenhead Primary School newsletter is promoting the Labour campaign launch in Northcote. Quote, Jacinda Ardern and Shannon Halbert will launch Labour's campaign. All local families are invited. So it's in the Birkenhead School Hall, so that seems all right. But then, quote, in addition to speeches by the Prime Minister and the Labour candidate, the launch will feature performances from local school children that reflect the diversity of the electorate. Now, are you all right with this, or is it, as I presume David Farrer on Kiwi Blog is claiming, a very bad look for a taxpayer-funded school to be playing party politics?
I'm all in favour of school facilities being used to better purpose in communities, but I think there is a difference between having a campaign launch and then having children performing there at that launch, if they're in some sort of like formalised capacity. So as long as it was open to all comers to do that from all political parties.
And they weren't singing a Labour song.
And they were all, well, they could, but that's probably not the plan. But I just think if that was freely available to all of them and that there was the same kind of performances provided or allowed,
Okay.
Do it.
I think the National Party's got a great opportunity here to try and get itself a school to launch in as well.
Yeah. I don't know if the National Party's approached Birkenhead School, but...
No, but you get my
But now we know it's available as a political venue.
Yeah.
There's a cringe to
That's
that.
what you mean.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So stagger it. Is it at the same time? Is it all prearranged? Look, obviously, it's a great opportunity for a party to launch at the hub in the centre of a community's focus.
Yeah.
So is there an element of that? I get the cringe part of that. But at the same time, all the other parties have got an opportunity to approach and launch if they're all in agreement.
I think they've probably all got their arrangements in place by now, don't
Probably
you?
have.
Yes.
Maybe they got stumped a bit on that one.
And the last school in the news, Shelley Park Primary, posting photos of bad parking at pick-up and drop-off times outside its gates before sending the photos on to the police, and apparently some are prosecuted. What do you think when you hear this story? Have you got sympathy for the drivers?
I do. I actually do, because it's getting harder and harder for people to even get to this school on time, let alone being photographed by the school for prosecution.
Being
How does
on
that
yellow lines
develop
outside
good
the
school
school.
relations?
Do you agree with that?
Yeah, as long as it's not blocking the areas where the kids are crossing the road safely.
Okay. Selwyn Manning, Claire Delore, thank you both for being on the panel today. And thanks everybody for listening. We're back tomorrow, and here is Checkpoint.
Tō te maere ai hoa mā, he kōrero kei te haere, he kaupapa kei te karawhiua. Welcome to Checkpoint tonight. Auckland's regional fuel tax is happening. Todd Nile on it and the city's 10-year budget. The Housing New Zealand homes that weren't contaminated with dangerous amounts of meth. Housing New Zealand tells us their CEO will never talk to us ever. The Russian dissident journalist who hadn't been murdered and wasn't dead. TVNZ secures the broadcast rights to the next America's Cup. But how many challenges are actually coming to Auckland? And as Agriculture Minister Damien O'Connor travels the country, we talk to farmers about Mycoplasma bovis. In fact, we call the old phone on the wall at the Makuri Country Club where the minister was and asked the farmers there how they're going.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina bat in aho. Fuel prices in Auckland are expected to rise by more than 11 cents in July after the council today adopted a new regional fuel tax. The tax was included in the city's 10-year budget and will raise around $140 million a year to accelerate transport projects. Councillors voted 2-1 in favour. Among the opponents was Manukau Ward's Efeso Collins, who says it will hit poor families, even though the transport improvements are needed.
I understand that argument, but when you are behind the starting blocks, when you are behind a zero, when you are below zero, this is taking food off people's tables.
Auckland Councillor Efeso Collins. Parliament is expected to pass the enabling legislation in June. Neither Housing New Zealand nor the Housing Minister will apologise to tenants unfairly evicted for meth contamination. Phil Twyford acknowledged this week that hundreds of people were unnecessarily forced out of their homes by the housing agency and admitted it wasn't fair. The Justice Minister, Andrew Little, has called on Housing New Zealand to apologise. In opposition, Mr Twyford accused the agency of deliberately misusing meth tests to evict tenants, calling it staggeringly incompetent and appalling conduct. But he's now ruling out any compensation or apology. Alistair Russell from Auckland Action Against Poverty says he's deeply disappointed.
To have moral integrity, you need to have a consistent approach when you're in government or when you're out of government. If your approach changes depending on your status as either opposition or government, then that's an appalling situation.
Alistair Russell. A Northland timber mill is celebrating a deal with Chinese foresters, which it says will secure its future. Waipapa Pine has signed a contract with China Forestry Group, guaranteeing its supply of wood at a set price for the coming year. The Chinese company owns cutting rights to Waitangi Forest, and the Regional Development Minister Shane Jones advised it last year to work with local sawmillers or face the ngāpui taniwha. The mill's director, Shane Horan, says the agreement is the first of its kind and it's huge for his company.
Because I can go back to the people that work for us, they can go back to their families and they can say that we've secured volume for the rest of 2018 with the intent of carrying this on for years after this.
Shane Horan says up till now the mill's had to negotiate for its wood supplies every 3 months, leading to ongoing insecurity. The police's serious crash unit and commercial vehicle safety team are investigating after a tour bus lost control on ice and crashed near Te Anau this morning, injuring 15. The crash occurred east of the small Southland town of Mossburn about 8 o'clock. Timothy Brown reports.
State Highway 94 was closed for several hours as investigators examined the crash scene. 3 people were flown to Dunedin Hospital, 2 in a serious condition, and 2 others with moderate injuries were taken to Southland Hospital. A further 10 people were treated for minor injuries at a local medical centre. Several days of frost and shade combined to make the section of the road where the bus crashed a sheet of ice. It is understood those on board are Korean nationals. The road has since reopened. This is Timothy Brown.
Top officials from the United States and North Korea have ended a first round of talks in New York to finalise plans for an historic summit in June between their country's leaders, President Trump and Kim Jong-un. General Kim Yong-chol joined US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo for what's been described as a working dinner. The BBC's Barbara Plett-Usher reports.
Kim Yong-chol dined with Mike Pompeo at a private residence in Manhattan. The State Department released photos of the Secretary of State showing his guests the view from the window and a menu signed by both men. A senior State Department official said they needed to reduce the gap between them over the extent and pace of nuclear disarmament before the summit could go ahead. The North Koreans have to do things they haven't done before, he said. He also acknowledged that the U.S. had to find a way to convince the North Korean leadership it would be secure without such weapons. This high-level meeting shows that President Trump and Kim Jong-un want the summit to take place.
Barbara Plett-Usher reporting. Hundreds of people have turned up to the opening of Christchurch's new QE2 sports complex. The Canterbury earthquakes damaged the facility beyond use, and almost 6 years after it was demolished, a new facility known as Taiora QE2 has risen from the rubble. Schools in particular are welcoming today's opening, having had to pay for transport to get their students to pools across town for swimming lessons. A councillor for the city's east, Glenn Livingstone, told a crowd of hundreds at an opening ceremony this afternoon that QE2's reopening signalled the dawn of a new era for the city's east, which has suffered from underinvestment since the quakes. Crowds of local and school children are touring the complex, which will be open to the public from 6 o'clock tonight. It's 5 minutes past 5. Sport. High Performance Sport New Zealand is launching an investigation over the departure of head sprint coach Anthony Peden from the national cycling setup. Peden yesterday confirmed he was stepping down from the role, and TVNZ reported the highly successful coach was at the centre of allegations of bullying and also involved in an inappropriate relationship with an athlete. High Performance boss Michael Scott says given the information they had, the organisation could and should have done more in relation to Peden. Scott says they hope the investigation will allow them to get to the bottom of the situation and they'll be able to learn from their mistakes. The New Zealand under-20 rugby side has turned in a complete performance in their opening match of the World Cup in France with a 67-0 win over Japan. New Zealand ran in 11 tries in all, but New Zealand captain Tom Christie says the match was much tougher than the scoreline suggests. But he was pleased with the first-up effort with their next pool match against Wales, who beat Australia.
There'll be little details in all our processes and stuff that we would look to improve moving forward, but I think the game tonight really gives us a platform to move forward off.
Tennis. The defending champion New Zealander Michael Venus and South African doubles partner Raven Klaasen face a tough second-round assignment at the French Open tonight. They're up against the French pair of Jonathan Esric and Hugo Nice. That's the news.
Bullying claims at Tauranga DHB.
It kills them, it destroys them. It's this belittling all the time so that you lose confidence.
Meth testing furore.
A little bit of overreaction going on here. There was no bogus figures.
And a Russian resurrection.
It's quite extraordinary. I've never seen anything like it myself.
I know it's a sickening, vomiting feeling when you have to bury your colleagues. You're sorry that they forced you to experience all of this.
Local and global news. Morning Report, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, why isn't basic dental treatment mandatory at aged care facilities? The Dental Association is calling for change. And after 10, how the charity Pillars is keeping high-risk kids out of prison. Join me, Lynn Freeman, in for Catherine Ryan after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland and Bay of Plenty. Fine today. A few showers developing about eastern areas in the morning, spreading elsewhere in the evening. Auckland, Coromandel and Taupo mostly fine, however cloud increasing late tomorrow and a few showers developing in the evening. Gisborne to Wairarapa, also Wellington, cloudy periods with a few coastal showers. For the remainder of the North Island, fine apart from areas of cloud from Whanganui to Kapiti today and areas of morning fog. Nelson, Buller, Marlborough and Canterbury, areas of cloud, clearing from Nelson and Buller tomorrow. A few showers about Banks Peninsula and coastal Marlborough, spreading inland tomorrow night. Fiordland, Otago and Southland, fine with morning frosts, but persistent low cloud or fog in some valleys. The Chatham Islands, cloudy periods with a few showers clearing for a time tomorrow. It's 8 minutes past 5 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina Batten. Welcome everyone. It's lovely to have your company. Coming up on the program tonight, Housing New Zealand and its meth tests. And we dial the phone on the wall at the Makuri Country Club near Pahiatua and talk to the farmers who just heard from Agriculture Minister Damien O'Connor. Also tonight, should 3 strikes be out? But first, the much-discussed petrol price rise in Auckland is now a certainty, with the regional fuel tax getting the green light. Today, the council voted 2-1 in favour of upping prices in July by 11.5 cents a litre. Now, all that's needed is for Parliament to tick off the legislation next month. Most councillors passing the 10-year budget back the need to accelerate spending to tackle Auckland's transport problems, but there was also passionate opposition from those who say it will hit the poorest communities the hardest. Our Auckland correspondent Todd Nile reports.
Everyone wants to fix Auckland's traffic congestion and make it easier to get around. The question is how to pay for it. For Manukau Ward Councillor Efeso Collins, who represents some of the poorest communities in the south, a fuel tax is not the way.
Yeah, I get it. We want Auckland to fly ahead. I understand that argument. But when you are behind the starting blocks, when you are behind a zero, when you are below zero, this is taking food off people's tables.
The fuel tax will raise about $140 million a year and cost an average household $140 annually. Daniel Newman from the neighbouring Manarewa Papakura ward favoured raising the same amount of money from property rates instead.
I am invited to vote for a regional fuel tax that represents what I consider to be a wholesale redistribution of wealth from some of the poorest people in Auckland who have the least choice to those who actually have the most, the greatest wealth, and who continue to be sustained by the greatest choice.
His fellow ward councillor Sir John Walker speaks rarely during council debates, but made an exception to oppose the fuel tax.
Basically, I lived and was bred in Manurewa, poor area, and it's still poor today. We give the people a wage increase and we take it back in fuel tax. So we're not actually giving them any reason.
But opposition from poorer parts of Auckland was not universal. Manako's Alf Philippaina admitted struggling in the face of community opposition, but felt the transport needs trumped those concerns. Josephine Bartley, whose Maungakeakea ward includes the big state housing area in Tamaki, reached for a quote to explain her support.
A society grows great when old men and women plant trees whose shade they know they shall never sit in. So for me that confirms what I'm doing here, which is for the future.
The tax will help realise sooner a wide range of small and large projects, including a busway in the east and the Skypath pedestrian and cycling clip-on on the Harbour Bridge. Councillor Penny Hull says Auckland's talked about a fuel tax for decades, and it's the inaction over that time that's hurting poorer communities. She says to reject it would be saying no to too much.
No to the road ceiling, no to the safety, no to the increased buses, no to the implementation of public transport for our vulnerable communities, no to the whole lot. And quite frankly, I think that's nuts. I'm not going to sit at yet another meeting and say no to decent transport for Auckland.
North Shore councillor Richard Hills says his support reflects what his constituency is telling him.
A lot of the time the younger people said, can you just sort out the transport and sort out the issues that Auckland seems to screw up time and time and again. Over decades it seems we've planned everything wrong, or we always want to delay things and hope someone else will do it.
The Mayor, Phil Goff, says the consequences of rejecting the tax, endangering a big investment program agreed with the government, are inconceivable. The alternative was another 10 to 11% on rates. He says communities struggling to pay will get a payback.
They'll get it back if we've got a decent public transport system that enables people that struggle to pay for petrol in their car to get around.
Councillors passed with little debate the extension of new layers of rates on accommodation providers to those renting entire properties through online providers like Airbnb. New targeted rates to speed up work protecting the environment and improving the quality of water running onto streams and beaches also passed without a quibble. The meeting opened with tributes to Councillor Dick Quacks, the former Olympian, who died this week after a battle with cancer. I tamaki makoro mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Todd Nile tēnei.
And Ted asks us what will happen to petrol prices in Auckland and how will they compare with the rest of the country, including some notoriously expensive areas, once this tax has gone on. We will answer that question in the next couple of days. Ted, thank you. It's a good one. And we'll get back to you. The Housing Minister has been labelled a hypocrite for failing to apologise or compensate hundreds of tenants who were kicked out of their state houses because of flawed meth testing guidelines. Phil Twyford has ruled out any compensation or an apology to the victims, despite having relentlessly championed their cause whilst in opposition. Political reporter Benedict Collins has more.
When Phil Twyford became Housing Minister last year, he immediately asked the country's top scientist to review the country's meth contamination standards. Sir Peter Gluckman's report was released this week and revealed the country has been gripped by a moral panic, and meth residue posed no risk to health at all. Mr Twyford says hundreds of tenants were needlessly evicted by Housing New Zealand, and it wasted more than $100 million on unnecessary decontamination. The Justice Minister, Andrew Little, last night called for an apology.
If Housing New Zealand or any landlord has kicked out a tenant on the basis of testing that we now know to be bogus, or a standard we now know to be bogus, and has totally uprooted an innocent person's life, then actually I think they, at the very least, is they are owed an apology.
Mr Twyford wouldn't be interviewed today, but in a statement says there would be no apology or compensation from the government. 2 years ago in opposition, he was livid that the housing agency was deliberately misusing meth tests to evict its tenants.
This whole fiasco shows a staggering level of incompetence by Housing New Zealand. It seems that they have strong-armed some of those tenants into paying tens of thousands of dollars of clean-up fees, again on the basis of dodgy testing. It's got all the hallmarks of Housing New Zealand being caught up in some kind of moral panic and doing massive financial and social damage.
A few months into his new gig as Housing Minister, it appeared Phil Twyford was going to carry on in the same way.
It was so bad and so wrong what had happened that Robert deserved an apology.
Here he is on Checkpoint in December, personally apologising to one tenant and promising change to come.
The moral panic around methamphetamine contamination of houses has been both drummed up and exploited by a meth testing industry that saw an opportunity to make a dollar by taking advantage of that moral panic.
But now, no blanket apology, no compensation. Auckland Action Against Poverty spokesperson Alastair Russell says that's hypocritical.
To have moral integrity, you need to have a consistent approach when you're in government or when you're out of government. If your approach changes depending on your status as either opposition or government, then that's an appalling situation.
Alastair Russell doesn't understand why the government will compensate farmers for a biosecurity breach that saw Mycoplasma bovis enter the country, but won't compensate those who were harmed by Housing New Zealand.
If that's okay for the farmers, it should be okay for low-paid workers and beneficiaries to be compensated for the failings of Housing New Zealand. I don't see a difference.
Housing New Zealand's chief executive, Andrew Mackenzie, who earns $46,000 a month, refused to be interviewed again today. He's never given RNZ an interview on his agency's meth testing policy, and his communications manager says he never will. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Benedict Collins.
Meanwhile, the taxpayer has paid millions of dollars in free renovations as a result of Housing New Zealand's botched campaign against the methamphetamine contamination that was it. This is because Housing New Zealand doesn't own all of its stock. Around 5% is leased off private owners, charities and community groups. Yet, in some cases, Checkpoint can reveal Housing New Zealand still paid for meth decontamination repairs on those homes. And remember, most of those repairs simply weren't needed. So Housing New Zealand effectively renovated homes for free, and you, the taxpayer, paid for it. Here's Zach Fleming with more.
In April last year, almost all of Tauranga's state homes were sold to a charity named Accessible Properties, a subsidiary of IHC. All 1,142 homes sold were then tested for meth, because Housing New Zealand offered to pay for all decontamination repairs. 147 homes, 13%, were deemed to need decontaminating, and Housing New Zealand began paying as promised. And this is despite it selling the stock for less than market value.
We're purchasing the housing at a price which is financially viable for us to continue to manage and improve them.
That's Accessible Properties General Manager Andrew Wilson talking to Checkpoint in August 2016. So Accessible Properties landed a great deal with Housing New Zealand for cheap homes. And then, as a result of Housing New Zealand's unnecessary campaign against methamphetamine contamination, it had up to 147 homes renovated for free. And Accessible Properties capitalised on that further.
Some houses will go into and will have a job sheet, one under Housing New Zealand and one under Accessible Properties, because housing is paying for all the P work, but Accessible might go, oh yeah, but okay, we're doing that, but paint that lounge and that one needs doing, let's fix that up too.
That's a Housing New Zealand contractor speaking anonymously, saying that Accessible Properties used the tradies Housing New Zealand sent in to do decontamination work to also do renovation work. Accessible Properties CEO Greg Orchard declined to be interviewed today, as did Housing New Zealand CEO Andrew Mackenzie. According to the contractor, action came swiftly when traces of meth were found in state homes.
For the last 18 months in Tauranga, everybody is frantically busy. Like, we've had to employ more people. It's just gone out of this world. You've had no idea.
But now we know most, possibly all of that action was needless. Accountability from those responsible is lacking. Philippa Howden-Chapman, a professor of public health at the University of Otago, who also co-wrote the state housing stocktake for the incoming government, says that $100 million could have been spent much better elsewhere, like building 200 new state houses.
And that would have meant that we wouldn't have had this cascade of housing problems, both for the people who were in the houses and also for the fact that there's a big gap in the number of state houses that were built.
Ms Howden-Chapman says it's wrong that Accessible Properties has profited from this decontamination renovation work.
In a sense, Accessible Properties got an upgrade of 147 properties, which is not cheap.
Accessible Properties says it will continue decontamination work on the 42 properties it has in Tauranga that are currently being decontaminated, despite it being highly likely none of those 42 actually need decontaminating. And Housing New Zealand will pay for that continued decontamination or renovation work. For Checkpoint, Zach Fleming.
I know we keep making this point, but Andrew McKenzie, Housing New Zealand CEO, is simply not available for interviews with us, full stop. We are really surprised that Housing New Zealand feel it's appropriate to just say a blanket no forever to interviews with their CEO, and we will keep asking them. 21 minutes past 5, a Russian dissident journalist has sent shockwaves around the world after he turned up at a press conference 24 hours after he had reportedly been murdered. Ukraine's security services have acknowledged they faked the murder of Arkady Babchenko to save him from what they said was a real assassination plot by Russia. As Bridget Burke reports, even Mr. Babchenko's family thought he was dead.
Gasps and cheers of shock, surprise and joy as colleagues of dissident Russian journalist Arkady Babchenko realise he's come back from the dead. The Russian journalist, who works for Crimean Tatar television channel ATR, was reported murdered in Kiev 2 days ago. The world was told his wife Alechka called an ambulance after finding him in a pool of blood outside their apartment with multiple gunshot wounds in his back. But today, as it was revealed, his murder was an elaborate hoax. The 41-year-old father of 7 turned up to a press conference on his own death and thanked Ukrainian state security for saving his life. Dressed in grey track pants and a black hoodie with the word journey, Babchenko looked sheepish as he told media he'd been reported dead as part of a special operation to thwart a Russian plot to kill him. He apologised for the anguish caused, particularly for his wife, but said there was no other way.
Over this month we were in constant contact. We thought things through and worked out the details. The result of that became this special operation, as a result of which one person has been detained.
Babchenko has long been a critic of Russian President Vladimir Putin and Russia's policies, including Moscow's annexation of Crimea and support for separatist insurgents in eastern Ukraine. A former soldier in the Chechen War, Babchenko became one of Russia's most prominent war correspondents. He fled to the Ukraine last year after his home address was published and he received multiple death threats. His fake death triggered a war of words between the two countries and prompted Ukraine's Prime Minister, Foreign Minister and the European Union to condemn the reported murder. Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko met with Babchenko after the media conference, praising the work of Ukraine's security for the secret operation he said had prevented the destabilisation of the country.
For what reason was this done? In order to destabilise the situation in Ukraine, in order to demonstrate inefficiency of authorities, and certainly in order to murder those whom Russia is most afraid of. And I congratulate you sincerely one more time that this operation went successfully and we did not allow them to fulfil this scenario.
In Kiev Square, journalists and activists celebrated.
That was the best news conference in my life. I have never experienced such emotions at any official event. We watched the news at a studio of a TV channel and I realised that I burst into tears, and it was tears of joy.
In the morning we planned to come in order to support Arkady Babchenko's family and certainly to demand efficient investigation of those brutal murders committed in the past, including the murder of Babchenko. But an hour and a half ago we found out and we were shocked that Arkady is safe and sound and that it was a special operation. Everyone is certainly shocked.
Ukraine's security officials have thanked Babchenko for participating in the operation, which had been planned for 2 months. It's the journalist's second near-death experience after he was barred from an overloaded helicopter 4 years ago, which later crashed, killing 14. For Checkpoint, Bridget Burke.
Home again, the Mycoplasma bovis roadshow saw the Agriculture Minister just northeast of Pahiatua today in a community called Makuri, roughly 45 minutes east of Palmerston North, a similar kind of distance north of Masterton and a little bit closer to Dannevirke as you head towards Hawke's Bay. In other words, the kind of farming country many townies seldom get to, but M. bovis can. Now, we've spoken to the Minister a couple of times on Checkpoint, but we wanted to talk to the people he's been speaking to, so we called the Makuri Country Club on the phone in the hall, and asked to speak to a farmer. And our cameraman Richard Tinderlin was already there following the minister, so he rolled as we talked. And the dairy farmer the phone was first passed to was Tracy Collis, who also happens to be the Tararua District Mayor.
To support the farmers and the community, but actually every one of these public meetings that I've attended, I've learnt something myself to take back to my own farm and community, and I guess share with everybody else. And that's through all media channels. I think the more informed that we all are, that we can stop the spread and gain a greater understanding of how it does spread.
So Tracy, you were there in two capacities really, but both as the local mayor and also as a farmer yourself.
Yes, that's correct.
And is this a cause for concern in your district?
There's a lot of uncertainty around, I guess we're coming up into calving. It's what plans do people put in place going forward. So for my own property, there is, where our cows grazed off during the winter. There's the consideration of boundary fences. Other farms, obviously we want to stop the spread and help towards eradication. And watching the uncertainty for farmers in the district, it's not something you'd wish on anybody.
So can you explain? So cows grazed off means that over winter when you're not milking, you take the girls somewhere else for feed?
Yes, so my husband and I have got a runoff up the road, so they are transported to the runoff. So you've got that whole transport issue. For Mike and I, we actually walk them down the road, so there's contact with neighbours. There's all those processes to think about and ensuring that we don't have any contact with other animals.
Which is absolutely central to dairying in New Zealand, isn't it? Particularly over winter. That's why June 1st is called Gypsy Day. Stock gets moved around. So do we have to change our behaviours entirely, or do you think this can be managed?
I think we need to tidy up our practices. Mike and I spent 5 years as organic dairy farmers, so within that system we had everything that came onto the farm was clean, so any truck had to arrive clean onto the property and leave that way as well. So there's some of those practices that we can tidy up, especially within boundaries. Hygiene practices, I think calf rearing and the way we purchase stock and the way we rear those stock will change this season.
Yeah. Nicholas, thank you so much. It's really good to talk to you. I can hear lots of people there. Is there anyone standing nearby you who wants to join us on RNZ?
Look, I'll just go and grab Sally for you. I won't be a
Thanks so much. Lovely to talk to you, Tracy. Thank you.
Okay, take care, John.
Thank you. So here we are at the Makuri Country Club, which is just north of Pahiatua in the northern Wairarapa, starting to drift towards the southern Hawke's Bay perhaps. Don't bother texting in about my geography.
G'day John, Sally speaking.
How are you, Sally?
I'm good, and you?
Yeah, good. Lovely to talk to you. What kind of farmer are you?
I'm a sheep and beef farmer, ex-dairy, but yes, my hometown was not far from here.
Okay, and so are you worried about M. bovis?
Oh, absolutely. So I should explain that I'm the local Federated Farmers meat and wool person.
Right, well, it's lovely to have you with us. Okay, so you're, a bit like Tracy, you're joining us in a couple of capacities. Let's talk about the personal one. Are you going to change practices on your farm, particularly around your beef farming, as a result of what you're learning?
Yes, because we tend to buy in dairy beef and fatten them. So we'll be looking for more surety about where they've come from. Will be one step, and we'll also be probably practising more care around the transport of them.
It's really fascinating, isn't it? Because farming has worked on a kind of informal mass transit of stock. And
absolutely.
Yeah, and all of a sudden, everything you do is going to have to become more rigorous, more cautious, better supervised?
Yes and no. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think it's that you'll certainly give it more thought about some of your existing farm practices. But hopefully, if we can manage to eradicate this long term, the pathways of share milking and things like that will still be there.
One final question: do you know anyone with M. bovis, or do you know of anyone with M. bovis?
Yes.
You do?
Yes. And I also know of one family that have come through and are now had the restrictions lifted, and that's hugely positive for them.
Wow.
And I think that's what we're going to keep in mind, and that's part of the privacy thing and why it's so awkward. You know, like they've come through now without being ostracised from the community because the testing proved that they didn't have it. We've got to keep that in mind too, because if it would say it was a stud farm, that would be the end of their thing. If we'd put it, their reputation would be shot if we'd put it out there too early. So by giving them that privacy to do the testing, etc., they've found out that they're clear. Yeah.
So they must have been pretty stressed out during the period of waiting to get the results.
Absolutely stressed to the max, and you can imagine it's not easy on anyone, and we want to come through this with every person intact, if nothing else,
Sally Dryland talking through that great phone on the wall there. Sally's the Federated Farmers Tararoa District Meat and Wool Chairperson. She's also, as you heard, a beef and sheep farmer. And before that, Tararoa District Mayor and dairy farmer Tracy Collis. You are on Checkpoint on RNZ, and thank you for being with us. The son of an elderly woman who was brutally bashed with a jack handle says the government's plans to repeal the 3 strikes law is wrong. That is coming up. Also coming up, the Salvation Army says conditions at some emergency housing providers in Whanganui are so poor they're putting vulnerable people at risk. And we'll go live to the brand new QE2 Sports Complex where the first swimmers in 7 years are about to take the plunge. In fact, they're going to do it for us live on air. Bless them. Known as next with business news, but with the time at 27.5 minutes to 6. Here are the headlines with Katrina.
Auckland City Councillor Efeso Collins says the fuel tax voted for today will hit the city's poorest families worst. Fuel prices are expected to rise by over 11 cents in July after the council adopted a new regional fuel tax. The tax, which is part of the city's 10-year budget, will raise about $140 million a year to speed up transport projects. Councillors voted 2-1 in favour. Neither the State Housing Agency nor the Housing Minister will apologise to tenants who were evicted for meth residue that's now been deemed unnecessary. Phil Twyford acknowledged this week that hundreds of people were unnecessarily forced out of their homes by Housing New Zealand. The Justice Minister, Andrew Little, has called on Housing New Zealand to apologise. But despite Mr Twyford accusing the agency of deliberately misusing meth tests to evict tenants while in opposition, he's now ruling out any compensation or apology. A Northland timber mill is praising a deal with Chinese foresters, which says it will secure its future. The mill's director, Shane Horan, says the deal is the first of its kind. Waipapa Pine has signed a contract with China Forestry Group, which owns cutting rights to Waitangi Forest, guaranteeing its supply of wood at a set price for the next year. The Regional Development Minister, Shane Jones, advised China Forestry Group last year to work with local sawmills or face the ngāpui taniwha. A former police officer who admitted sending explicit text messages to a 13-year-old girl has been declined entry to become a barrister. Ethan James Brown applied to the High Court to be admitted to the bar after his application was challenged by the Law Society last year. Justice Wiley has said the Law Society has justifiable concerns. Hundreds of people turned up at the ceremony to mark the reopening of Christchurch's QE2 sports complex this afternoon. Known as Taiora QE2, the new facility has risen from the rubble almost 6 years after the original had to be demolished after the Canterbury earthquakes. 12 schools and hundreds of children have already signed up for swimming lessons. The complex will be open to the public from 6 o'clock tonight. And as you heard, on Checkpoint.
We're going to go there live. Yeah, thank you, Katrina. Business news now.
That's right, I better hurry so we don't miss the live show.
Yeah. No, we're just, it's all planned. Architectural planning.
I'm so happy.
Nona, it's lovely to have you with us. Business Confidence has taken another dive in another survey. This is a serious
dive because it's a 4-point dive, and it's not just the business outlook on the economy as a whole, but on their own investment. And that's quite concerning because really that's the more important figure. What are you doing with your own business? And in that case, response were intending to invest less, they were intending to hire fewer people, and they were also expecting lower profits. Now that is quite significant, and it was the retail and construction sectors that were the least optimistic, which are key drivers of our economy. And as a result of that, the ANZ thinks that the business and consumer surveys that we've been seeing indicate the economy will grow about 2%. Now that's against the government's forecast 3%.
Yeah.
So if it grows, at 2%, that's a significant difference, and overall, that's not a very good sign. We'll see what happens, I guess. Yeah, so it's just a survey after all. It's not actual numbers.
No, but there's been a series of surveys saying similar kinds of things.
Yeah, business confidence, we've had a lot of negative commentary, but not always.
Often the way from the business community after the election of a Labour government, right?
True, but strangely, we've had some positive feedback on the government from the Airlines Association, the Trans-Tasman Airlines Association. They think that this government's on the right track when it comes to talking about regulation for airports. They think that Auckland Airport's charges are excessive, and that's for the money that they're looking to raise to cover the cost, $2.2 billion of costs for a new runway and, new airport terminal, how they want to blend the domestic and international, all of that. So it's going to cost a lot of money.
Their argument is that Auckland Airport is monopolistic. And given that the overwhelming majority of tourists who come to New Zealand arrive through Auckland Airport, and there is only one airport in Auckland, it's a fairly easy case to make, really, isn't it?
Well, it's true for every city. I mean, look at Wellington, Christchurch, Hamilton. I mean, it's all the same. There's only one airport. You're not going to have two airports.
So you are a natural monopoly. The question is whether your behaviour is monopolistic,
well, the thing is, they're wanting more regulation. They think that this government's sympathetic towards that. They're putting their hopes in there. So, hey, it's not all bad news, right, for the government?
What happened on the markets, Nona?
Well, the dollar, let's see. The dollar is holding on to overnight gains at 69.8 US, 92.4 Australian, and 52.5 pence, and that's after things settle down in Europe. So the NZX, we closed up 11 points, 8,659.
Nona Peltier, thank you very much indeed. I was fidgeting and shuffling around then because we've got some breaking news as Nona was talking. Armed police are responding to an incident in Putaruru. The police have tweeted to say they were called at 4:45 and are currently en route to the scene, we understand. We'll have more information as it comes to hand. We believe it may involve weapons. Well, obviously the police are armed. We think there may be armed people at the scene, or at least that is the concern. We'll update that the moment we hear more from police. That's in Putaruru. Right, it's 22 minutes to 6 as the government moves to repeal the controversial 3 strikes law. Justice Minister Andrew Little has a short time ago set out a likely time frame for how the repeal will proceed.
Look, I couldn't give a timetable on it. When legislation is introduced, it's normally kind of a 6-month process from beginning to end, so it's just a question of when it's introduced. I would say about 3 strikes too. There's not much that 3 strikes does that can't be done with existing sentencing legislation. It is already a principle that if you committed the same offence again or again and again, then you have an escalating level of sentence. And then, depending on the nature of it and the nature of you as an offender, you will have conditions attached to your sentence. So everything is already there. 3 strikes was only ever a gimmick.
Are you going to get the support of Winston Peters? After all, 3 strikes was initially his idea in the 1990s.
Look, I think Winston has an interesting point that he puts to me. He says that he's sick and tired of innocent New Zealanders getting mugged on the streets and then getting mugged as taxpayers a second time. So I think New Zealand First members are up for a constructive debate about effective criminal justice reform, and that's where we're going.
But you'll need their support. You'll need their support if 3 strikes is going to go.
Yeah, and so this goes to Cabinet in roughly 10 days' time, and Cabinet will make its decision about whether to introduce legislation into Parliament.
Andrew Little speaking to reporters at Parliament a short time ago. But the man who in the late 90s drove a citizens-initiated referendum in which 92% of the 2 million votes cast called for tougher sentences for serious violent offenders says 3 strikes does have a place. Norm Withers' elderly mother was severely beaten with a jack handle while looking after Norm's shop. The law and order petition he started gained so many signatures that a referendum was held in 1999 without overwhelming public support, 92%. And he told me a short time ago he still doesn't think politicians and the courts have it right.
Well, to be honest with you, I'm sort of struggling to come to terms with it because I hear Mr Little with these plans and reducing prison numbers, etc., 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 and it's not going to work. And I mean, the 3 strikes, frankly, it was long overdue. It gave judges opportunities to impose the correct penalties therein. I know that there hasn't been that many people that have gone past the 2nd strike, and the point of the matter is, I don't know if people realise, but there's up to about 40 qualifying offences, so it's not just one item or one factor that would bring about consideration for a further strike. There's a number of offences that fall into this category. And I feel a lot of this is in the hands of the judges, and in fact, going back in time, largely I thought we had, John, reasonably sensible sentences in terms of longevity, but often they weren't dished out in that vein. I mean, I know there was a time when, for example, home invasion gave the judges the power to give another 5 years on top of the maximum penalty for the crime, but I never saw it invoked very often. I've been over the years, John, very, very uptight about parole and parole entitlement. Now, back in 2002, I remember dealing with Mr Phil Goff, and he was kind to ring me and say that murder has become now parolable after 17 years. And I said, well, that's an improvement. It used to be 10. I never condoned a guy that stole a dozen cans from the bottle store. But the people that violate people such as my dear mum by a person that had 56 criminal convictions finally went to jail for that. Again, went to jail and then came out and offended again in the same vein. I've got no consideration for those sort of people.
The thing is, I guess, if you look back to your referendum in 1999 and the overwhelming public support for it, there was a sense of the politicians, and you referred to Phil Goff, who was in government after your referendum, there was a sense the politicians and the courts listened. Do you think they did?
To be very fair, yes, I do.
Right, and the sentences got longer. So do we need 3 strikes? We have a prison population at over 10,000, its highest level ever. It's risen 350% in the past 30 years. Do we need 3 strikes, or are the courts already doing the job you would have them do?
The courts are not doing the job, but that's my point. The facility is there for the judges to use a maximum sentence, but they don't. Often they don't. And how would it be if I said there's, I think to my knowledge, approximately 20 murders in the last 5 or 6 years that have been committed by people on parole? Well, one doesn't have to be a road scholar to work out that that's 20 poor people that have lost their lives, and look at the affected families. And part of the referendum, John, was about consideration for victims. Now, if you go to the Sentencing Act in 2002, Item 27 calls upon offender being requesting the court to hear in person from the whānau, the community, the family, about the cultural background of the offender, etc., etc., etc. But nowhere does it say, let's have the voice of the victim. The victims are always the last considered, and they're the ones that suffer the most. I've heard, we know the stories about toys tossed out of the cot, this, that, and the other, but I used to say, John, and I mean it, way back then, we're not living in Zanzibar, we're living in New Zealand. We all know right from wrong, and if you choose to go down that path, there's consequences. Sadly, the consequences aren't high enough.
Norm Withers talking to us a short time ago. Sex workers say they are being undercut and crowded out by foreign prostitutes working here in total breach of their visas. They say the country is seen as an easy place to work by women who can make thousands by working on what's meant to be a holiday, and they fear their concerns are being marginalised. Jill Bonnet reports.
One of the main sex worker websites advertises more than 800 women, separated into Asian and non-Asian prostitutes. Amber O'Hara, who works in Christchurch, says while some of the women advertising themselves to be visitors would in fact have residence or be citizens, New Zealand prostitutes are now outnumbered by immigrants. She doesn't want to be identified by family and friends, so doesn't choose her real name, and we've not used her voice.
The New Zealand sex industry is now on a quite predictable trajectory, containing mainly illegal sex workers willingly travelling here to work from countries where it is legal, yet it's a see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil situation from those with the actual power to help.
A 2008 report by the Prostitution Law Review Committee estimated there were about 2,300 prostitutes. Ms O'Hara wants a registration scheme so advertisers will have to check someone is legally able to work here.
It will mean that New Zealand ladies who do want to work, who are straight with the IRD and trying to do the right thing, can actually run a sustainable business without unfair competition from people who are not doing the right thing by our law. People are just really despairing because New Zealand is seen as a soft touch. It's just out of control.
A Hamilton sex worker, Lisa Lewis, says she's offered to meet with the Immigration Minister, Ian Lees-Galloway, to discuss what action could be taken.
Any other industry, there would be a crackdown on illegal immigrants, but there seems to be an ignorance of legal sex workers being ignored, and the illegal sex workers are basically carrying on profiting in our country.
Other prostitutes spoken to by RNZ say some immigrant sex workers are charging half the rates of their New Zealand counterparts. They say international students are working more than the 20 hours a week they're allowed to under their visas, believing they could get away with that in sex work, but would be caught and deported if they did that in any other workplace. Ms Lewis says holidaymakers are another source of workers.
Most people, when they go on a holiday, you max out your visa, you max out your credit card. These girls are leaving home with their credit card, and credit. It's definitely at a disadvantage for any legal sex worker because we're having to pay tax. We've got the provisional, the income, the GST tax. We've got ACC levies. These workers are leaving New Zealand without having any of that taken off them, which to me is robbery to the government.
A spokesperson for Mr Lees-Galloway says he's responded in detail to correspondence from Miss Lewis and passed on information to Immigration New Zealand, but he's not seen any request from her for a meeting with the Minister. For Checkpoint, Jill Bonnet.
It is 13 minutes to 6. The Salvation Army says conditions at some emergency housing providers in Whanganui are so poor they're putting vulnerable people at risk. The tenancy manager for emergency housing in the city, Piki Huia Box, says she avoids referring people to Purnell House, a rundown former school hostel, and to the Bignell Street Motel and Campground. Our Taranaki Whanganui reporter, Robin Martin, went to take a look.
Built in 1931, Purnell House was originally a boarding hostel for up to 100 boys from the neighbouring Whanganui Technical College, later the Whanganui City College. The two-storey neo-Georgian building, which sits on 3.5 hectares of land, closed in 1980 and ownership reverted to the District Council before it was sold about 15 years ago. As the Salvation Army's tenancy manager, Piki Huia Box, observes, it's seen better days.
So Piki Huia, we're standing outside Purnell House, I think it's called.
Yes.
Can you describe to me what you see here?
A very derelict building, to be honest. Yeah, very run down. I don't know that it's really inhabitable, but however, it's being used for housing. Yeah, what more can I say? It's in a terrible state.
Ms Box is not inclined to send clients to Purnell, even in emergencies.
Will you refer people here?
I haven't yet referred anybody to Purnell House. I wouldn't be inclined to refer anybody to Purnell House. I don't think it's very sanitary, to be honest, and I don't think it's a very safe environment for our clients, whether they are high complex or not. No, it's not a place that I would be referring.
When I head through the main entrance, it's dank, dark and reeks of mould. I wave down a young man in his 20s, Luke,
and he directs me to the manager, Matt Narpecker, before disappearing off into Purnell's cavernous corridors. How are you doing? My name's Rob. Mr. Narpecker, who according to the council is the owner of Purnell House, freely admits the building is in need of some TLC.
Purnell House is, as you see it as it is. This building has a history of youth. It goes way back to 1930.
Yeah.
Okay. Up there you've got over 120 tonne of concrete tiles on the roof. You see the building's done in brick and it's been plastered. It's got a bit of wear and tear on the building. It needs basically another paint job and a bit of turb. It's got a history.
Mr. Narpecker says he never turns anyone away.
All the people that have been out in the street for the last 15 years that no one wanted, that's what it's catered for.
Yeah.
This building has taken every single person in that has been directed to it by government agencies, hospital, WINS, mental health, any person.
It costs $120 a week to rent a room at Purnell, and Mr. Narpecker says some of the tenants are difficult.
The latest room that got done was someone through mental health. They hadn't had the medication for 4 days. Well, apparently he lost it. So the room got smashed up, fridges, TVs, beds, everything. Windows got knocked out. Yeah, that's the sort of stuff we do have to deal with.
Pressed on whether Purnell House is a safe place to live, Mr. Narpecker is non-committal.
I would describe it as a place that's sufficient for people to live. And when you look out there, where you look in town, it is better than living out on the street. It is better than someone living in their cars.
Pikihuia Box says she has even more concerns about the Bignell Street Motel and Campground at Gonville. Tell me about this place.
So this is Bignell Street Motor and Campervans Park. We often use this, or have used this, for emergency housing.
So you're still referring people here?
We are still referring people here very reluctantly at the moment. It hasn't been a safe environment. The people themselves are very reluctant to come here because they're aware of the activities that take place here.
Ms. Box says she has removed at least one person from Bignell Street for their own safety.
I do have a client with me currently at the moment that we've moved from here, and she is now in long-term accommodation, but she was attacked here and spent 11 days with no shower, fearful of going into the shower block, and stopped eating out of fear.
Bignell Street's on-site manager, Peter One, declined to be interviewed. He invited RNZ to write an email to the owner, but we never received a reply. Real estate agent Ross Watson has recently taken over day-to-day management of tenancies at Bignell Street. Mr. Watson says he's trying to iron out some of the problems Ms. Box is worried about.
The way I view it, if I didn't do what I was doing, and that is trying to keep it professional, management side professional, doing tenancies under the Tenancy Act with bonds, then you might have some issues. I would say trying to do as best as professional as I can, given the clientele and given the circumstance.
For Stuart Thorpe, at least Bignell Street is a roof over his head. So Stuart, how long have you been here?
5 weeks.
So what brought you here to Bignell Street?
Emergency housing. The house we were previously staying in sold, so there was nothing affordable. Being on a benefit in Auckland, where we just came from, me and my partner, was too expensive to rent a house in Auckland. So we had to come back down to Tamaranui, which didn't work for us there either. So and we ended up with emergency housing, and the only place they could put us was here.
Mr. Thorpe says there's a variety of residents.
They're good. There's different races, and there's a few with mental health issues, obviously. I think they're more the long-term residents of the camp. But yeah, I know it's probably what they need, somewhere stable.
When asked about the suitability of these accommodation providers for mental health outpatients, the Whanganui District Health Board provided a one-line statement. Its Director of Area Mental Health Services, Jeff Hammond, says its multidisciplinary teams do not support people living in either accommodation provider, but some choose to. The Ministry of Social Development's Deputy Chief Executive Housing, Scott Gallagher, said in a statement the demand for housing in Whanganui was exceeding supply.
We're aware of some issues with Purnell House and Bignell Street Campground, and we know they're not ideal accommodation for everyone needing urgent housing help. We don't actively promote them to our clients, nor do we fund them as a provider.
But MSD does pay for people who choose to live at either Purnell or Bignell Street.
Sometimes a client will opt to stay at either Purnell House or Bignell Street Campground. If the client is comfortable with that, or it's a last resort for them and the difference between sleeping rough or in a car, we'll support them with emergency housing costs.
Mr Gallagher says if anyone living at Purnell House or Bignell Street Motel and Campground has concerns, they should get in touch so the Ministry can work with them to provide alternative accommodation. According to the MSD's latest housing register figures, there are 74 outstanding applications for emergency housing in Whanganui. I Whanganui mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Robin Martin.
Thank you, Robin. It's 5 to 6. We're just going to go to Christchurch in about 30 seconds. We want to update you on what's happening in Putaruru. In fact, we can't tell you exactly what's happening, but we can tell you who's there, and that gives you an insight into how significant this event may be. A very large number of police cars there in Putaruru, which is about 60-65 km southeast of Hamilton in Waikato. Our producer Bridget Burke's just been speaking to a witness who wished to remain anonymous, but they said they saw roughly 20 police cars, 4 ambulances, we understand. Armed police are there and dogs too. So a very, very large call out. We're not sure what's going on, but the moment we have more details, we will obviously bring them to you. Let's go to Christchurch, where in a few minutes the newly rebuilt QE2 facility will officially open to the public for the first time in more than 7 years. The Canterbury earthquakes damaged the complex beyond use, and almost 6 years after it was demolished, a new facility known as the Tai Ora QE2 has risen from the rubble. Hundreds of people attended an opening ceremony this afternoon. I don't know if you can hear the noises behind me. They're now swimming and splashing in the centre's pools, I think. Logan Church, there you are, trying hard not to be splashed. Are people actually in yet, Logan, who is joining us via live view from Christchurch?
Hi, John. Yes, people are now in the pool. Many of those kids who were involved in the opening ceremony are now in the pool, and behind me they're coming down the hydro slide. I think we're in a safe splash distance away, but we'll find out in the next few minutes. And here I've actually got some kids who were one of the first down the hydro slide. How did you all find the hydro slide?
Logan,
so they all really enjoyed it, but now QE2 is back up and back in business.
Yeah, which is wonderful. What happened at the opening ceremony? Tell us about that.
So it was quite short and sweet, John, but essentially Leanne Dalzell, the Mayor, and some of the other local councillors, Glenn Livingston, David East, Poto Williams, made a speech and a presentation, and also they made a symbolic planting of a tōtara tree. Why that was important was when the initial sod turning ceremony took place on the site, they also planted a tōtara tree. And I suppose it's just coming around the full circle. So now it's a sort of a ceremonial, symbolic way to say that this area now has an aquatic centre for the first time since the earthquakes.
Yeah, this is a real milestone for this for the east of the city, isn't it?
Absolutely. There had been a real concern for quite some time that a generation of Kiwi kids might actually have missed out on swimming lessons. That was certainly raised by Councillor David East, and he was very worried about the situation, especially given how close we live to the sea here. But now, hopefully, there'll be a bit of a catch-up, and maybe these kids will be able to get those lessons they missed out on since the quakes. And yeah, the community here, John, are absolutely stoked. There are smiles all around.
Yeah, there's a delightful scene unfolding behind you as someone's coming down on a tyre or something. It's not a tyre, I'm showing my age there. And just one final question before you go, Logan. What sort of temperature is the water? Can you reach in and give us what is it?
Probably a bit more of an arm's reach, but it's certainly warm. It's quite nice. In fact, I'd quite like to sit down the bottom of the hydro slide. It would be like a bit of a spa. There is a spa on the other side of the pool, and you might find me there a bit later on.
Excellent. Logan Church joining us live from Te Ora QE2. Thanks, Logan. We really appreciate it. A lot of feedback coming in. We're waiting for more information from Putararu, but people asking, does the CEO of Housing New Zealand not consider himself a public servant, and as such surely has a duty to front on a national broadcaster? Perhaps our new PM might be able to encourage him. Interesting to see Ross Bell from the Drug Foundation on Twitter saying, actually, Andrew McKenzie should front because the regime improved when he arrived. So we really do want to talk to him. Thank you for your report on Housing New Zealand. The CEO and Board of Directors should be sacked for their incompetence and blind ideological zeal. They've wasted our money and taken homes away from some of our most vulnerable citizens. And Meg asks, John, I don't understand the call to apologise to evicted tenants. Surely they were evicted for allowing someone to use an illegal drug in the house. That hasn't changed, even the standard for harm has, Meg asks. And the question is, and this is me because I am inexpert on it, but the levels were so low, Meg, that in fact the contamination could be old, could be from previous tenants, or could be from somebody who was just there on a Saturday night. In other words, it was an entirely circumstantial case, and people were being punished without any direct cause and effect between their occupancy and the contamination. That, in part, is the point. It's 6 o'clock.
RNZ News at 6. Talofa lava, good evening. Ko Katrina Batanaho. The Housing Minister has been labelled a hypocrite for refusing to apologise or compensate hundreds of tenants who were kicked out of their state houses because it used flawed meth testing guidelines. Phil Twyford championed the tenants' cause while in opposition. Auckland Action Against Poverty spokesperson Alistair Russell says that's at odds with the government's stance on compensating farmers for the outbreak of Mycoplasma bovis.
If that's okay for the farmers, it should be okay for low-paid workers and beneficiaries to be compensated for the failings of Housing New Zealand. I don't see a difference.
Alistair Russell from Auckland Action Against Poverty. A Northland timber mill is celebrating a deal with Chinese foresters that it says will secure its future. Waipapa Pine has signed a contract with China Forestry Group guaranteeing its supply of wood at a set price for the coming year. The Chinese company owns cutting rights to Waitangi Forest, and the Regional Development Minister Shane Jones advised it last year to work with local millers or face the ngāpui taniwha. The mill's director Shane Horan says the agreement is the first of its kind and it's huge for his company.
Because I can go back to the people that work for us, they can go back to their families and they can say that we've secured volume for the rest of 2018 with the intent of carrying this on for years after this.
Shane Horan says until now the mill's had to negotiate for its wood supplies every 3 months, leading to ongoing insecurity. The police say they're responding to an incident in Putararu in Waikato. No other details are available yet. A New Zealand farmer says the industry will have to clean up its act if it wants to stop the spread of Mycoplasma bovis. Earlier this month, the government announced plans to totally eradicate the disease, which has affected 37 farms throughout the country. A farmer and Tararua District Mayor Tracy Collis says that farmers will have to tidy up their practices if they want to prevent any further spread of Mycoplasma bovis.
Especially within boundaries, hygiene practices, I think calf rearing and the way we purchase stock and the way we rear those stock will change this season.
Tararua District Mayor and farmer Tracy Collis says managing the disease will become all the more important during calving season. A Hawke's Bay iwi and local winery have agreed to close a controversial track on Tamata Peak and build an alternative route together. It follows an ongoing dispute since December when local iwi Ngāti Kahangungu demanded that Craggy Range Winery remove the track and restore the land to its original state, Te Anewa Hurihanga Nui reports.
Craggy Range Winery promised in December to remove the walking and cycling track after the local iwi were outraged to find their ancestral landmark had been carved into without its consent. But earlier this month, the winery released an expert report saying remediation would never get the land back to its original condition. The two parties have now come to a compromise. They will buy 28 hectares of land between them, close the track and build a new one that will protect areas of cultural significance. Ngāti Kahungunu says the new track will be open to the public. Ko te aniwa, hurihanga nui ahau.
The Kremlin has described the staged death of a Russian journalist by Ukraine's security services as cynical. Ukraine has acknowledged they faked the murder of a Russian journalist, Arkady Babchenko, to save him from what they say was a real assassination plot by Russia. As the BBC's Frank Gardner reports, the incident will do nothing to improve relations between the two nations.
Relations between Russia and Ukraine are at an all-time low following Moscow's annexation of Crimea and the ongoing conflict in eastern Ukraine. The recent deaths of several Kremlin critics in Ukraine have been laid at Russia's door, but this staged non-death will inevitably muddy the waters. Russia already denies any involvement in the attempted assassination of its former spy Sergei Skripal in Salisbury in March, calling it fake news. The deception in Kiev is now likely to be seized on to strengthen Russia's case.
Frank Gardner. The Riverhead quarry attacker and repeat rapist Colin Jack Mitchell is appealing his conviction and sentence. Today, lawyer Mark Ryan told RNZ News his client would appeal the pre-trial decision to try him for the quarry attack at the same time as an historic rape from 25 years before. Mitchell was sentenced earlier this month to preventive detention with a minimum non-parole period of 10 years. The sentence means he cannot be released until he proves he's no longer a threat to society. He was convicted of abducting a young woman in Auckland and taking her to a quarry at Riverhead, north of Auckland. DNA at the scene linked the 60-year-old to a 25-year-old unsolved rape in West Auckland. Mitchell was also convicted of the rape. It's 6:05. Sport, high performance sport New Zealand say they could and should have done more in relation to departed Cycling New Zealand coach Anthony Peden. Boss Michael Scott has confirmed the organisation will launch an investigation into Peden stepping down. TVNZ has reported Peden was at the centre of allegations of bullying and also involved in an inappropriate relationship with an athlete. Scott says High Performance Sport hopes the investigation will allow them to get to the bottom of the situation. The Crusaders will remain without All Black duo Sam Whitelock and Ryan Crotty for tomorrow night's Super Rugby derby with the Chiefs in Hamilton. Whitelock and Crotty have been dealing with concussion. However, the Crusaders will have Joe Moody, Israel Dagg and Jordan Tofua back for the clash. All Blacks flanker Sam Cane has been confirmed on the bench for the Chiefs after an abdominal injury had him in doubt. The match will pit several All Black teammates against one another just days after their training camp in Christchurch. And Chiefs lock Brodie Retallick says it's a little strange to be in an All Blacks camp one week and then to play against your national teammates the next.
I guess it's a bit different, but you know, it's a good thing about rugby. We're all mates off the field, and what happens on the field generally stays there. So come the weekend, everyone's out to win, and that's what Super Rugby's all about.
Brodie Retallick. And the Warriors say star halfback Shaun Johnson is on track to return from injury in Saturday's National Rugby League clash with Manly in Christchurch. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, this week's culture ambassador Charlotte Wilson has a few classics from the classical music world. And to celebrate the end of Kiwi Music Month, we've got Radio with Pictures on the radio, an episode of Karen Hayes' iconic show preserved by Ngā Taonga Sound and Vision. Because Karen will be away hosting a Q&A on Radio Pictures at Ngā Taonga, I'll be slipping over into this. As in lately, with any late-breaking stories here and overseas and a bit of a look back at the news of the day, it's all part of Nights with Brian Crump on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland and Bay of Plenty fine today. A few showers developing about eastern areas in the morning, spreading elsewhere in the evening. Auckland, Coromandel and Taupo mostly fine, however cloud increasing late tomorrow and a few showers developing in the evening. Gisborne to Wairarapa, also Wellington, cloudy periods with a few coastal showers. For the remainder of the North Island, fine apart from areas of cloud from Whanganui to Kapiti today and areas of morning fog. Nelson, Buller, Marlborough and Canterbury, areas of cloud, clearing from Nelson and Buller tomorrow. A few showers about Banks Peninsula and coastal Marlborough, spreading inland tomorrow night. For Fiordland, Otago and Southland, fine with morning frosts, but persistent low cloud or fog in some valleys, and the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods with with a few showers clearing for a time tomorrow. It is 8 minutes past 6 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
8 minutes past 6. 4 minutes ago, a statement came in from police. Headline, police presence in Putararu, that's South Waikato, about 60k southeast of Hamilton. It says, it's very short, it says police were called to an incident in Putararu at 4:45. We've already told you that. Officers, including the Armed Defender Squad, are in the area making inquiries to establish exactly what has taken place. At this stage, no information has been confirmed. We will continue to provide updates as we can. Well, it's not much of an update from police, although clearly this is still unfolding. We've been told there are a great many police cars in an area of Putararu and also 4 ambulance, armed police and dog patrols are there. We will update you the moment we know any more or we hear any more from the police. It's 9 minutes past 6. A Hawke's Bay iwi and a local winery who've been at loggerheads over a controversial track snaking up to Mata Peak plan to close it and build a new one together. The walking and cycling track was built last year, prompting an outcry from Ngāti Kahununu and others. Craggy Range Winery promised to remove it, but this month released a report saying remediation would never get the land back to its original condition. The two parties have now come to a compromise. They will buy 28 hectares of land and build a new track that will protect areas of cultural significance. The Hastings Mayor, Sandra Hazelhurst, told our reporter Te Aniwa Huri Hanganui it's a win for everyone.
It's really exciting for the parties to come together and look at an alternative solution. We've been working towards this for some time now, since we first met in January, and so this is a really, really exciting, positive way forward.
Okay. Now, the council appointed a team of independent advisors to help, to help the iwi and the winery come to an agreement. Now, what is their role from this point on?
So the first and foremost is to have a cultural assessment undertaken. So that's the biggest. Before we look at any other track solutions, we need to ensure we have that cultural assessment done. We also need a landscape report done, and that's how sensitively we could, if there's another track going to be there, how that could be done that's not going to impact on our beautiful, outstanding natural landscape.
Okay. Now, when the existing track was made, the council made the decision not to consult local iwi or publicly notify the track's consent. What's different with this new track? Will the public be notified?
Well, yes, there's a huge interest and has been since it went in from all parties, all of our community and beyond, but our visitors as well. So given that there is so much public interest, it's most likely to be publicly notified.
Okay. So why has that decision been made when the existing track, the local iwi were never consulted or the public?
That is something that our council has come out and said that we apologise for. That is what didn't happen and should have happened, and this is the way forward.
So some lessons have been learned here?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
That's Hastings Mayor Sandra Hazelhurst talking to Te Aniwa Huri Hanganui. It's 6:11. TVNZ has secured the rights to broadcast the next America's Cup being held in Auckland in 2021, and work is well underway behind the scenes to transform part of the city's waterfront for the defence. Around $165 million will be poured into a stretch of central Auckland's already rapidly changing harbour edge. So with the broadcast rights sorted out and resource consents in the pipeline, our Auckland correspondent Todd Nile went to take a closer look at what will change.
The exploratory work's underway on the transformation. At the city end by the Maritime Museum, Hobson Wharf will be extended by 72 metres and the Viaduct Events Centre on Halsey Street Wharf will be converted to a base. An 8-minute walk to the west towards the Harbour Bridge. Chemical and fuel storage facilities on Wynyard Point will make way for 5 Challenger bases. Team New Zealand's Andy Nottage says 5 double and single bases will be created where teams can erect their buildings.
They'll be set back, so they'll be in line with where the road is currently, and then they'll have a large forecourt of about 50 metres in front of them, and that will come out onto the wharf where the yachts will come out from the sheds. A crane will pick them up and place them into the water, and that's where they'll start off to head out to the racecourse.
So it's going to be really heart of the action, this spot here, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It's going to be fantastic, I think. I get a really great view from here on North Wharf to see all the challenges.
Just who will be where isn't yet known. 3 challengers have declared their plans and get to choose in the order they entered. We then wander past the eateries opened in time for the Rugby World Cup to what will be the centrepiece of the country's hopes. Sitting between the two challenger locations, Team New Zealand will take over one of the waterfront's landmark buildings, turning it from an exhibition centre into its base.
So yeah, there'll be two hangar doors, 14 metres wide, 9 metres high, and the columns will be removed, so there's 4 columns in all, and a lintel will have to go between the spacing of the columns that are left there. So quite a bit of work to structurally make it so we can fit our boats and make it fit for purpose.
There's a big viewing platform on the harbour side, and Team New Zealand wants to turn on a public experience.
We are planning an interactive area within the building on the bottom floor, and so the public can see and understand the history of the America's Cup. They're not only going to see the boats going into the water, which will look fantastic, but there'll also be some interactive area in the building itself.
So the boats will basically come out almost through this area that we're standing in, will they?
Yeah, that's correct. This is our forecourt. It's quite small, but I think we can make it work. And there will be a crane here which will lift the boats into the water.
Potentially the other focal point will be at the end of the adjacent Hobson Wharf, a prime spot which the challenger of record Prada has first dibs on.
So there's a challenger base that's going to be out here on Hobson Wharf, so they're going to extend Hobson Wharf, so it's like an extension of the Maritime Museum Wharf, and it's going to be a pretty exciting area. It's going to have some public interaction area there and also a viewing area, so you're right, this was really exciting in 2003 with all the public viewing the boats as they were going in and out of the channel and the entrance to the viaduct.
An example of how an America's Cup can change a waterfront landscape is behind me, where a 6-storey luxury hotel is being built on land that was reclaimed for bases for the 2000 and 2003 defences, most famously for Alinghi, which took the Cup away in 2003. The surrounding viaduct harbour with its apartments, hotels and restaurants arose for the Cup defences starting nearly 2 decades ago. The 2021 Cup will have less impact in the long run, but is expected to be Auckland's even hotter spot for at least a summer or two. I Tamaki Makoro mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Todd Nile tēnei.
Coming up to 6:16. That Todd's story was shot by Dan Cook, by the way. A Wellington couple building their dream waterfront home say they're living a nightmare after they were sold an incorrectly marked grade of steel. The steel supplier maintains it's done everything it can to help rectify the situation, but as Phil Pennington reports, after months and months of legal wrangling, Gail Van Hattem and her partner Michael Harper are still in limbo.
Anyone who builds a house allows for a contingency of time and money, but no one allows a contingency for weak steel. Wellington real estate agent Gail Van Hattem and her partner veteran builder Michael Harper sure wish they had.
Well, we decided to come to Lyle Bay on the beach and we managed to buy this property and build this home. And so we couldn't get any closer to the beach if we tried. I mean, it's just, look at it, it's absolutely fabulous.
The dream begun in 2014, by 2016 was turning into a nightmare.
When we were pouring the second floor, just before we poured it, we realised we had a problem with the steel. So
how did you realise that?
It was too soft, it was bending too easy.
How did you figure that out?
Well, it was experience, you know, a lot of it was just cut and it was the last bit that was bent in the slab. So you don't realise until you bend it.
It was always going to be a tough thing to do, building in unforgiving concrete, glass and steel atop a sea wall on a narrow site in front of their existing home. The undoing has been even tougher. Michael has been cutting up his own work with a concrete saw.
You can see this concrete mess here that's had to be dug up. So this has all had to be dug out from along the front to support the cantilever.
It's propped up now on the rocks below, but not in time to stop the concrete cracking on both floors.
This crack that you can see in this floor here is the cantilever, which was originally...
This crack here.
Yeah, and there's another one across here.
With the house a shell, they remain embroiled in months of arguments over what's gone wrong and how to fix it. One thing that is wrong is some of the steel reinforcing bar inside the concrete. The supplier, Euro Corporation, last year admitted it sold them 300 grade steel incorrectly marked as 500 seismic grade steel through hardware chain Bunnings. Euro has said its Malaysian factory made a marking mistake during manufacture that affected a tiny amount of rebar. The Commerce Commission is still investigating. But even how much of this weaker steel is in the Lyall Bay floors is disputed, and only demolition and testing could prove that.
Builders are responsible for faulty material as well. We have to assure that we are building within the rules, and that includes you're building with code-compliant material. But how are we, when we see a problem, we notify, which I did, but it's still no guarantee.
Euro wouldn't go on tape. In a long statement to RNZ, the company says it has taken extraordinary steps to put things right, far beyond any potential legal liability. Bunnings says it and Euro have made several comprehensive offers, and it remains open to settling. The Wellington City Council also says it has tried hard to help. Neither the council nor Bunnings would go on tape.
The trouble is, the compromise they're all trying to reach is one that only the homeowners will actually have to live with. Euro says it does not accept that its mistake with the steel is responsible for all the project's issues. And of course, all building projects have issues, but these can be exacerbated by New Zealand's relatively loose controls around building products.
Bruce Conn heads up the Building Industry Federation, which represents suppliers. Gail Van Hattem went to see him.
It is very upsetting for anybody in those circumstances, and therefore, of course, one can understand it. All I know is that we, as a federation, take our view that our members should be responsible in these situations, and I think that Eurocorp, the supplier of the steel, has taken a responsible position.
Bruce Conn is less cautious when it comes to faulting the system for failing to keep substandard building products out.
We suggested that there be a change to the law to require manufacturers and suppliers of building products to label and declare their products as compliant to the relevant standard of the building code.
Don't they do that already?
No, they're not required to do so.
Most people would think that they do when they're buying a product.
And a number do, and some don't.
But they're not required to?
They're not required to.
That sounds like a relatively simple fix. Why are we in this situation?
Well, we're in that situation because nobody has bothered to change the law since we drew it to the attention of the authority.
The building products assurance system has been found wanting again and again. A new review of that system has just been announced by the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment. It did a similar review last year. This resulted in a 3-page document and officials meeting once with Building Minister Nick Smith. An Official Information Act response shows no decisions were taken at that meeting last June, and Dr Smith sought no further advice. The 3-page document says that MB is constrained by a lack of powers to investigate product issues and is at the early stages of understanding problems with building products. Gail Van Hattem and Michael Harper cannot just shrug any of this off.
We feel that it's a pretty disgusting regulation that New Zealand has to protect people. You know, Michael and I have probably 55 years of building and real estate experience between us, and to find ourselves in this situation, we just think it's just disgusting, it's disgraceful.
Their main engineer says in a statement it's advised them on how to lighten the load on the steel, but hasn't heard back. Their former architect told RNZ he sympathised, but that these were engineering problems. Neither would go on tape. The couple are left with uncertainty, whether a $200,000 2-year court case can succeed, whether anyone will even insure their home, and have arrived at one firm conclusion, that it's riskier to build a house in New Zealand than it should be.
Yeah, we just need the public to know that whilst the government and Wellington City Council would like everyone to build houses, it's not that much fun sometimes. And in my job, I would tell anyone now, buy a house, renovate it, change it, do whatever. Do not build. Do not build. I tell people that every day. Do not build.
For Checkpoint, Phil Pennington.
22.5 minutes past 6. Across the Tasman now, and police in Victoria are in major damage control mode today after admitting officers falsified more than 250,000 breath tests over a 5-year period. One expert says the confession will erode trust in officers, and already a government organisation has frozen the millions of dollars it gives the police for road safety measures. The ABC's Jonathan Hare is in Melbourne.
A stunning and embarrassing admission from Victoria Police. Assistant Commissioner Russell Barrett is from the Professional Standards Command.
It's very disappointing that I have to stand before you today and announce some incredibly poor behaviour by members of Victoria Police.
Over 5 years, officers in Victoria conducted 17.7 million roadside breath tests. An internal review has found more than 250,000 of those were fake, 1.5% of all tests.
The tests or the falsified data is members putting their finger over the device to result in a false test or blowing into the device themselves. So if I step that through in terms of how we enforce road safety, this is a preliminary breath testing device. No one is then there on itself presented before court in respect of a falsified test. They have to take the next step to undertake a formal breath test, an evidentiary-based test.
So why on earth did police do it? Assistant Commissioner Russell Barrett reckons headquarters didn't give any order to meet certain breath testing targets.
Victoria Police doesn't set quotas at local level broadly. If local members, local managers set a target for members, then that's a matter for local areas.
But he concedes better numbers make officers look good.
But I don't think we can move away from the fact that it would enhance productivity of certain individuals and it would enhance their reputation if they are seen to be more productive.
The Secretary of the Victorian Police Association, Wayne Gatt, has no doubt officers are under pressure to hit targets.
Our members for many years have been telling us they're working in an extremely under-resourced environment, particularly in general duties and in the highway patrol.
Victoria Police will now roll out a massive training program to explain to officers why the conduct was wrong. But Simon Longstaff, the Executive Director of the Ethics Centre, believes the problems could go beyond dodgy breath testing records.
There will be a consequence in this, which is a loss of trust in the application of law by Victoria Police. The Police Command in Victoria need to be asking, are there other things that we've got embedded in our systems, our policies and our structures which could be having the same effect?
The fallout for Victoria Police has been swift. Already, the state's government-owned Transport Accident Commission has suspended $4 million in funding for road safety activities, including breath testing.
That report from Jonathan here for the ABC, 6:25. Let's return to this really bizarre situation. Ukraine's security services have acknowledged that they faked the murder of a Russian journalist to save him from what they said was a real assassination plot by Russia. Arkady Babchenko suddenly appeared alive and well at a press conference where he thanked security services for making it appear as though he'd been shot dead outside his apartment in Kiev. The BBC's Jonah Fisher is in the Ukrainian capital and he sent this report.
This was the scene last night outside Arkady Babchenko's apartment. Ukraine's police had just announced that the Russian journalist had been assassinated. A fearless and outspoken critic of Vladimir Putin, Mr. Babchenko's death seemed another chilling example of the way the Kremlin targets its opponents wherever they live.
It's calculated, deliberate international terrorist crime.
This morning, we were at the apartment.
Somewhere around here, as he went into his apartment, he was shot in the back several times.
There was a strange lack of police, but at that point, we had no inkling of what had really taken place. Neither did most Ukrainian politicians, who were quick to point the finger of blame towards the east. It marked another dark moment in the awful relationship between Russia and Ukraine. A steady stream of anti-Kremlin figures have been assassinated on Kiev's streets. But Arkady Babchenko, incredibly, is not one of them. 19 hours after he was declared dead, he was brought forward, very much alive, to gasps at a press conference. Colleagues at his TV channel responded, as you might expect, in amazement. It turned out that Mr. Babchenko had been a willing participant in a security service sting, apparently to catch a Russian-linked man who really was trying to kill him.
First, I would like to apologize for what all of you had to experience, for what you had to get through. I have buried friends and colleagues many times, and I know the sickening feeling. I'm sorry you had to experience it, but there was no other way.
As Mr. Babchenko went to meet Ukraine's president, the debate as to what had happened began in earnest. For many, the ends have justified the many lies. Others are wondering about the lasting impact on Ukraine's credibility. It claims to be on the front line, fighting against Russia's war of disinformation. Now it's been responsible for perhaps the greatest of all fakes.
Yeah, an extraordinary situation, that Jonah Fisher in Kiev, almost ending Checkpoint for tonight. We just want to update you as much as we can on what's happening in Putaruru. Lots of conflicting reports coming in, so we're not going to speculate and we're not going to tell you anything that we can't confirm. What we can confirm are armed police are there in large numbers. Ambulances are there, 4 of them we understand. Dogs, also domain drivers cordoned off. The police tweeted to say they were called at 4:45, and witnesses have said they saw police cars racing at speed to a fairly unpopulated part of Putaruru, which is about, an hour's drive south of Hamilton. We don't know any more than that, and the reports we're seeing are so conflicting that I think any more is speculation. Obviously, RNZ News will update this throughout the night, and we may hopefully have more for you in the 7 o'clock news. Thank you for being with us this evening. We really appreciate your company on Checkpoint. On behalf of the really fantastic Checkpoint team, that is the program for this evening. The theme is by James Milne, aka Lawrence Arabia. So let's fade it up and enjoy 15 seconds before Katrina's along with the headlines.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Armed police have been at an address in Putaruru in Waikato for more than an hour. About a dozen police cars and the St John ambulance are in the street, but it's not yet known what the emergency is. Auckland's new fuel tax will come in July, but councillors who voted against it say the over 11 cent per litre hike will hit poorer communities hardest. A Northland timber mill is celebrating a deal with Chinese company China Forestry Group, which guarantees its supply of wood at a set price for the coming year. The Riverhead quarry attacker and repeat rapist Colin Jack Mitchell is appealing his conviction and sentence. And the police are investigating an accident near Te Anau this morning in which a tour bus lost control on the icy road and crashed, injuring 15 Korean tourists. Our next news and weather is at 7.
On